of the films considered that the July 23rd revolution ended an era of political and social corruption. After the revolution of the July 1952, many films analyzed the structure of corruption, especially caused by the monarchy and the external occupier. The cinema remained one of the most important ways of social reflection on which the history depend on in analyzing an important event which happened with the July Revolution. Dear viewers, in this context and celebrating this very special day, which is the July 23rd Revolution, and celebrating it from a very special place, which is the Gamal Abdel Nasser Museum. Dear viewers, today we have with us Dr. Mariam Wahid, which is a professor of political science, of course, at the Cairo University. A very good day, Dr. Mariam, and it's a pleasure to have you with us in today's episode of Nile Cruise.
Thank you very much for having me today.
Dr. Mariam, cinema and the July 23rd revolution. Of course, the films that were made. Talk to us about the most famous films made about the revolution and your perspective about them. Yeah, it's the question I had to ask. رد قلبي. I mean, that's what everybody knows, but we want to know other films and talk to us about that specific film and other films, important films, and how they affected the way people think about the revolution now.
Yeah, of course, 23rd of July revolution was portrayed massively in Egyptian films. And as well, it reflected film industry. So it was not just portrayed by like independent filmmakers who were just portraying it from a side of the regime or outside the regime, or just having Abdel Nasser himself was keen on producing films, and that was reflected in several institutes that were established at after the revolution took place. Like, for example, the Egyptian Institution for Filmmaking. So and there were other like art institutes also established, and he was keen also on giving space for filmmakers to produce more films freely and without control and censorship very much, even though that there were some films subject to some censorship for some time, but he allowed those movies, even those which were criticizing his regime. So that's to give you like an outlook or a panoramic view of what was taking place. But Abdel Nasser himself, he liked movies, he liked cinema, he even had his own cameras, not only like producing like still photos, but movies, making movies. It's not only photos. So he was keen on this, and he was also allowing movies to be criticizing his regime, specifically after the 1967 defeat. Several writers thought that this era was called the Green Light period, where Abdel Nasser allowed or left space for filmmakers to express what they felt the reason for the 1967 defeat. And that was portrayed in films like Case 68, which is not very well known, by Salah Abu Saif, mentioning that the Socialist Union was the reason for this, and the committees established were the reason of this defeat.
So here is a case, I guess, where the facing up to the reality.
Yes.
The cinema was there. The public cinema went with public opinion, and because we faced the reality, we were able to win again in 1973 because we faced ourselves.
Yes, of course.
And
yeah.
cinema had a role
How cinema also played a role in the scene from this kind of defeat to victory of 1973. So that was a period where people were facing themselves, and the public opinion also had a say, and filmmakers, because filmmakers didn't abide totally by like decision makers' ideas, but also they reflect public opinion and influence public opinion.
Of course, Dr. Mariam, cinema is a soft force. which can make a big difference and affect the thought of people. How do you use cinema from your point of view for the public good?
So of course, cinema is a tool and a soft power of manifesting like soft power, and in 1952 that was reflected very much because Abdel Nasser believed since the early days of the revolution that cinema should play a role, and that was reflected in movies. The most famous of one you talked about is Give Me Back My Heart or Rudda Qalbi, and that's the most famous one, portraying the 1952 revolution in a very romantic story, love story between Ali and Inji, and how this was trying to undermine the classes, and that was one of the main principles of also the revolution itself, is that you have to establish social justice and you have to end feudalism. So that film reflected those principles. That's how cinema can reflect political values and political concepts. That social justice was a key theme of the 1952 revolution, and that was reflected in films like Give Me Back My Heart, like Soft Hands, that you have to work, the importance and the essence of work in the revolution. Yes, that's one of the movies. The importance of work, the work ethic, and that would establish the state, and that not your inheritance of land from ancestors, but you have to work, you have to produce something for the country.
Dr. Mariam, from your own point of view and perspective, how can you evaluate the film which focused on the life of Gamal Abdel Nasser?
The film itself?
Yes.
Of course, the film, Abdel Nasser's life was very long, and of course he, not long in terms of like years, but I mean it's full of events, it's full of things. So it's maybe more films can be produced on Gamal Abdel Nasser's life, and the film was concentrating about the Suez Canal, nationalization of Suez Canal. So maybe more portrayal on, for example, like short films about, for example, cinema and Gamal Abdel Nasser. So maybe it's kind of a documentary film that how Abdel Nasser believed in the importance of cinema and importance of art, and how he left space for filmmakers to produce what they liked, even though that was against maybe some of his views, and maybe some of his advisors or the ministers at that time, or the people on the head of censorship committee told him not to leave space for some movies like Miramar, like Shay Min Khouf, Glimpse of Fear. So they advised him not to allow such movies because they attack Abdel Nasser as a person, not even as in a symbolic way, point of view, of course, not directly. But he said, no, I'm not that person. I'm not the mayor that takes the lands from the people. I'm not that person, so I would allow this movie.
And how did you see Ahmed Zaki portraying the role, portraying the character of Gamal Abdel Nasser?
Of course, Ahmed Zaki is one of the best actors all over the world, not only in Egypt. Yes. So maybe the language that he was not very good or excelled in English or other languages, maybe that would be a reason that hindered him, for example. But as portraying Gamal Abdel Nasser, of course, and in portraying Sadat, both characters, he was for me, or for everybody, for the public, he resembled. He could imitate everything: the facial expressions, the attitude, the body language, everything.
Very true. I mean, the late Ahmed Zaki could have easily been another Omar al-Sharif. Yeah.
Yeah.
And this is an area where Egypt lacks no talent at all. we don't, but cinema is your field, Rana. But Ahmed Zaki, Noor al-Sharif, I mean, this is an area where Egypt had world-class actors, but the language sometimes was the barrier, right?
Anyway, when we come to reach a conclusion where Ahmed Zaki portrayed President Sadat and he portrayed President Gamal Abdel Nasser, and he played both roles in an amazing way. He was a perfectionist. Brings us to the conclusion that he is an amazing, if not one of the most talented actors that that the Arab world have ever witnessed.
Yes, of course.
And of course, he passed away half through the film Abdel Halim Hafiz when he was portraying the role of Abdel Halim Hafiz.
Yes.
Unfortunately, it never came to an end.
Yeah.
Dr. Mariam, which is closer to contact the idea from your point of view, cinema or journalism?
For me, cinema, I can say it's like you can reflect in it ideas, ideologies, and everything like related to people in an indirect manner. So it's not just like if we're talking like regimes, and if they want to express some ideas or some values to the public, then if you do it through journalism, it's very direct. It's very so that is unlike, for example, cinema, which is full of emotions, full of values linked to the people. So when you go for as regimes, like you want to portray like social justice, if we say we are just please adopt this social justice as a value, or we believe in social justice, it's completely unlike that. Social justice like social justice is important for you, and it's something like the main difference is that this is an art and this is not. It's not art. It's just something. Maybe journalism or newspapers, they reflect public opinion, but they are not producing something like a creation or something that can change people.
Yeah, Dr. Mariam, the cinema and sometimes TV series as well. Portrayed the 1919 Saad Zaghloul revolution. It portrayed, of course, the 23rd of July revolution. It talked about what happened in '67. It portrayed the '73 war victory and other historic events through the course of modern Egyptian history. In your view, where did the cinema really succeed or was near its best at portraying which event, and where did it, fail or was very short of, of giving the event what it deserves?
So the criteria to say if it's succeeded or not is subject to different things, because does this success, is it linked to the revenues of the movie and how many people really watched the movie, or if it lasted for a long time and people still believe in this?
Yeah, maybe the second criteria is very strong.
Yes.
Yeah.
So films like Give Me Back My Heart, films like Port Said, we didn't talk about this movie, but it's a very famous movie portraying the struggle of the Egyptian people in Port Said against
the occupation,
tripartite aggression. Yeah. So those movies are still affecting people. Maybe we are not just linked to the idea of the aggression itself or the period itself, but the idea of self, the consciousness, the struggle, those values of nationalism and
of sacrificing oneself. Of sacrificing oneself.
Of sacrifice, of countering enemies, of nationalism. So those values are embedded in people, and that's what makes people rewatch those movies again and again. And even if those movies are displayed in like
tens of times,
yes, hundreds of times, and maybe you would watch it again because not only they they had a moral and they had a premise that affected people and that described people emotions, and that's the difference between like newspapers or just like those are like dry material. They are not like something artistic, something affecting people's emotions and values very much. So.
Dr. Mariam, but before we leave, I would just want to ask you a very touching question. Your feeling after all the studies you're doing, and you're here today at the place where late President Gamal Abdel Nasser, the leader Gamal Abdel Nasser, used to live in his museum today. How do you feel today?
I feel that like most of the like photos I'm happy. I'm the first time for me to come here, so I'm really happy to see this place and where he lived, and I like the photos very much because they are expressing something that I've studied is how Abdel Nasser was very close to the people. So cinema is one of those tools to be very close to the people because it's addressing people, literate and illiterate people from different ages. It's based on the power of image, not the power of language. So it's a different discourse. But those photos are, we can see them as how Abdel Nasser, people loved Abdel Nasser. Maybe there are some critics against some of his policies.
Naturally, it's natural.
Yeah, because it's it's politics. So it's there are some critics. There can be some critics, but the most important thing is that he was very near people, and that was maybe it's expressed here in the photos and expressed in the documentaries about Abdel Nasser's life. So yeah, I'm happy to discuss. I think that he exerted a lot of effort in cinema and for example in establishing a cinema institute to also graduate people who liked film and produced films.
Of course, it was a pleasure to have you with us today.
Thank you very much.
Yes, Rana, thank you very much. Dr. Mariam Wahid, Assistant Professor at the Faculty of Economics and Political Science, Cairo University. It's been a pleasure. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Dr. Mariam.
Dear viewers, Rana and I will be back momentarily. Please stay with us.